the first slide. Chris?
Yes, hello. Hello, Greg.
Oh.
Hello, everybody. And thanks again for your patience and your interest in coming back. So we've got a great series of webinars, the first of which is today on marketing ROI.
Right. So it's Greg Runnerstrom here again. This is the first of a series of 6 webinars. The 6 webinars are all educational tools that can help you build your business, and they are all marketing related. Just to give you a preview of what's coming, after this one there will be a webinar on user reviews and ratings, another one on Google Analytics, and another one on and there's some others that I'll tell you about later. These webinars are free to you because you're a customer of Jason's and you bought a print and web package for next year, and we really appreciate your business and we'd like to add value back to your business. During this webinar, it would be good if you have questions for you to ask those questions, because we want to make this as interactive and as useful for you as possible. After the webinar, we'll be sending out a survey, and it would be great if you could fill that in so that we can continue to tailor these webinars to what you're after. The people on this webinar are myself, Greg Runnerstrom, GM of Marketing, Lara Ortiz from Jason's. She's going to be asking some questions and answering some as well during the webinar, and a special guest speaker who I'll introduce in a minute. What you're seeing now is the first screen is a display showing how to participate in the webinar. I'll pass you over to Helen, who will give you some more instructions on this. Helen?
Great, thanks Greg. Just a couple of things I'd like to draw your attention to today. You'll see on the right hand side of your screen is your control panel, and you can view that on this slide here. If you want to ask questions at any point, all you need to do is type into the little box that says enter a question for staff, the question that you want answered. There will be a Q&A session towards the end of today's webinar, and your questions will be answered in that. If you have any difficulties with your technology, anything you need to know, please type your questions in that box as well, and we will answer them as best we can. Just one more thing, if for any reason your connection ends today prematurely, all you need to do is click on the link provided to you that you access the webinar from, and you'll be able to come back in and join us again. I hope you enjoy the broadcast today. Thanks. Back to you, Greg.
Thank you, Helen. Today's webinar is a very important subject. It's about how to invest your marketing, where to invest your marketing dollar, and how to measure what ROI you're getting on it so that you get the maximum return on your investment, and hopefully increase your room rates and your occupancy rates. The subject, as I said today, is particularly important because costs are rising, and as I understand it, room rates aren't, and there's stiffer competition for all those tourists and visitors out there. We are aware that in your role you're probably doing a job of many hats, being the accountant, the receptionist, the business strategist, the marketer, the online manager, the customer service person, and the cleaner. And with all of those hats, you need to distill down the essential pieces of accounting and marketing and running the business that you must do well. And hopefully this webinar that you're attending today will do that for you in terms of investing your marketing dollar and measuring your ROI. I'd like to introduce our guest speaker. Our guest speaker is Chris Adams. Chris has many years of experience in the tourism industry, and he is an expert on investing in marketing dollar. Chris has worked, as I said, many years in the tourism industry. He started with Newman's Tours in New Zealand, and then was head of the RTO for Coromandel, and he was at Jason's during the early years in Jason's implementation of our online products. So he was GM of Marketing from 1999 to 2004 when Jason's introduced an online product and grew it very well and got good results for you guys. Chris is currently a director of the world's largest agency for direct marketing organisations and has had experience across a number of companies that he's able to bring to bear on this presentation today. So I'm very pleased to introduce Chris Adams, who's going to run the session for us. Thank you, Chris.
Thanks a lot, Greg, and greetings, kia ora to everybody who's on the webinar today. So first question is, does this picture feel like you? Henry Ford II famously said that he knew that half the advertising dollars he spent were wasted, he just didn't know which half. But with the tools, the processes, the tips we're going to talk about today, there's less reason to feel like this. And in fact, most of your advertising and marketing should be measurable, and you should be reviewing it constantly based on those results and making smart decisions about what's working and what isn't. So it's a big subject. Some of the detail we'll be providing is obviously an introduction only. There is a white paper which we'll introduce shortly that's got a range of additional resources, and obviously, as Greg said, many of you are trying to manage all these parts of the business, so it's important to know when and how to reach out for support and advice and expert assistance. So make sure that where it's appropriate you use the tools that we're going to talk about and that you seek additional assistance where it makes sense. So we're really going to talk, Greg, about 4 sort of fundamental issues today. First of all, this whole concept of don't guess. You should have a plan to measure the results of all of the key areas in which you spend your advertising dollars, both offline and online. Particularly online, we've got some really powerful and free analytics tools. They're increasingly easy to use. They're free, which is obviously fantastic. So it's much less now about the size of your budget in terms of these online marketing platforms, and much more about your smarts and how you can use them effectively. We want to measure what's called beyond the click. So we're not just measuring response, and we're frankly not just even measuring bookings. We're going to be emphasizing the concept of a range of success events, or we call them signals of intent to travel. They're also called goals. Basically a range of factors in addition to bookings, and we'll talk about why just measuring bookings is not enough. And then perhaps most importantly, the concept of actionable analytics. So you need to use this information to basically make smart decisions about how to improve your campaigns that you're running, how to make sure that you don't run for months and months and months, and certain advertising may not be working that well for you. Certainly if it's online advertising, you've got the opportunity to re-engage with those advertising partners, and certainly I know Jason's is keen to do this to make sure that the advertising you've invested with online is working for you as well and as powerfully and effectively as possible. So we're going to go through these 8 topics today. We're going to talk about how travelers plan travel and the media they use. We're going to discuss a measurement toolkit that every business can have, and as I've emphasized, these tools, certainly the ones we're discussing today, are free. The importance of having a plan, an advertising and marketing plan, and what should be in that plan, defining specifically what to measure and how to measure it both offline and online, and then we'll get to the crux of the issue today, how to calculate return on investment. And everybody's incredibly busy, so what's a few things we can focus on most importantly and first. So I understand, Greg, this white paper is available from Jason.
Yes, that's right. Thank you, Chris. There's a white paper on this subject about best practices in tracking and managing your ad campaigns that is available at myjasons.co.nz. Along with, at the end of the white paper is a series of websites that you could go to. It'll give you more information about the subject and some useful websites for understanding how big the market is. The website will also have, over time, all of the webinars, a copy of all the webinars, recorded webinars on that website, so you can go back and refer to them. The copy of today's webinar will go up in a couple of days' time. Thank you, Chris.
Great. So just before we get into the topic today, I just wanted to emphasize some of the essential things about marketing and advertising, and we've called this getting the basics right. And I know many of you are experienced being in the tourism industry for many years, and so you'll know this intuitively, but I just wanted to emphasize the importance of getting these basics right, because without getting these basics right, it doesn't matter how good you are at advertising, frankly, and how good you are at online marketing, advertising, and measurement, because obviously these are fundamental to success in any tourism business. So that's obviously the importance of offering a great experience. So meeting and exceeding the expectations of guests. Word of mouth has always been important, and with social media and the pervasive nature now of social media, any negative experiences and positive can obviously be shared much more broadly. Secondly, understanding who are the customers that are going to be most interested in your service, your product, your accommodation, your activity. So having a very clear sense of who you appeal to. Defining your message, so what is your unique selling proposition, not trying to be all things to all people, but having a very defined message that can hopefully get cut through in what is an incredibly cluttered landscape in terms of both choice and media. And then obviously you need to make some smart decisions about the right media, and that obviously is driven off the audience and the message. So basically, how do you reach that audience with the message? What's the right media mix? And then the topic we're talking about today comes after all those fundamentals, obviously measuring, refining, improving your advertising and marketing based on results. So let's jump into the first part of our webinar today, how do travelers plan travel and what are the media they use? So I think, what has happened, Greg mentioned when I worked with John Sanford on developing the first Jason's online offering back in the mid-90s. In those days, of course, media was much more simple. What's happened in the 15, 16 years since that is we've seen an explosion of media. So traditional media still is obviously there, but we've added all these electronic channels, and the nature and use of these electronic channels is just constantly expanding. So frankly, what's happening is that consumers are just using more and more media channels. So you'll see from some of the stats that I'll share shortly that print usage, for example, has actually held up surprisingly strongly in recent years. So people are still using print, but of course they're using online and new electronic channels, platforms, and devices such as mobile in increasing ways. So that the masses of media, or the media mix, has just become a lot more complex. And obviously, therefore, the importance of planning and measuring the various channels has just become even more important for you. I'm sure many of you are just overwhelmed by the range and choice you have and all the various approaches you get for advertising solutions. So it's critically important to both be able to assess what works for you and obviously measure results based on where you've invested your money. So if we step back and look at the high level, and this is a combination of research from both domestic research and also international research, if we focus on the average domestic New Zealander, about 2/3 of them go online to plan New Zealand travel or New Zealand holidays. And that includes obviously visiting sites such as Jason's and others, regional tourism office sites, and obviously visiting social media sites or travel review sites. So obviously about 2/3 are using a range of sites. About 40% of New Zealanders, this is data from the Regional Visitor Monitor, say that they still reach out to friends and family, the old fashioned word of mouth. About just slightly less than 1/3 say they still use print directories, and as I mentioned before, that really hasn't moved. If we've got time at the end, we can actually have a look at what's happened over the last 5 years in terms of the Regional Visitor Monitor, and the number of people using print has basically stayed pretty consistent, even as the number of people using web and mobile has expanded greatly. And then about 10% of people say they use other mainstream or significant traditional media, such as newspapers, TV, radio, for planning their New Zealand vacations. So a typical online traveller, and remember that's about 2/3 of New Zealand domestic travellers and about 75 to 85% of international travellers, depending on the market that we're talking about, go online at some point during their international trip planning if they're coming to New Zealand. But a typical New Zealand online traveller visits an incredible number of different websites. So they're visiting a huge number of different websites during their online research and planning phase. They will complement it with other media, traditional media, but very importantly, they usually book offline. And in fact, the latest stats, this is stats out of Focusrite and an Australian accommodation report that both of those just came out in the last 6 months, indicates that between 22 and 40% of total revenue for accommodation in Australia and New Zealand currently comes from online bookings. So obviously, the majority of bookings for many sectors, and of course it could be greater or less than this, depending on exactly the type of accommodation that you're in. So the majority of bookings, even for people who have researched and planned their trip online, is being completed offline or has been being completed on another booking-orientated website. So for example, they may come to a site, research plan, go away, and then come back online and perhaps book through, for example, Expedia or another more traditional or well-established booking-orientated website. And I think, Greg, you've done some analysis, haven't you, around this broader concept of how bookings fit in with the overall sort of signals of intent to travel, the other sort of success events that Jason's tracks.
Yes, that's right. We did some research of visitors to our website over a period of a month and analysed the actions that they were taking at our website. And as you can see, the actions taken are broken down by that pie chart that you're looking at. Each of those actions is a signal of intention to travel or book travel. And as you can see, 37% of the actions that people were taking when they were on the Jason's website was to click through to the operator's own website to perhaps book or to find out more information. Other things that they were doing was 15% were looking at maps, 24% of the actions were looking at the description of the accommodation or the activity, and then if you go down the bottom, only 2% were actually making a booking of the actions that were taken. Were only making a booking on our website. So I guess there are two conclusions out of this. The first is that don't just rely on number of bookings to see that your ad is working for you online wherever you are, because there are a number of other things that tourists are doing or travellers are doing when they're online that could end up in a booking. For instance, if you click through on a phone number or if you click through to an operator's website, then it's quite likely that you're going to make a booking through those offline media. The other thing that I think is important from this is the value of having user reviews, the value of having maps, and the value of having a detailed description, because those are the things that people want. So yeah, that's the result of our research. Chris, thank you.
Yeah, and in fact, just confirming this analysis here, Greg, we operate in about 65 destinations around the world, including a number of regional tourism offices in New Zealand, but many states and cities in North America. And we've done a series of conversion studies where we actually connect with people on websites of these destinations and basically interact with the consumer, get some questions, and then go back to them 2 or 3 months later and find out, did they travel, and essentially connect the dots between their actual travel behaviour and what actually led to decisions to make a booking. And of course, with most of the bookings being made not at that particular point of research, we've confirmed that things like viewing detailed descriptions of a hotel or a motel or a bed and breakfast or a campground is a pretty significant indicator of interest and intent to travel, as is obviously clicking on a phone number or even something, for example, like looking at a detailed map view. So we've typically found that those two indicators, for example, map views and detailed descriptions, there's a sort of 20 to 45% correlation, i.e. 20 to 45% of consumers who actually complete that action end up travelling and making a decision in part based on that information they collected. So let's move on and talk about the measurement toolkit. So if we're measuring a range of signals of intent to travel, in addition to just bookings, and obviously bookings are important, but we've got these other factors, what are the tools that we need to do that? We've also got to think about offline, of course, traditional advertising and how to measure that. So if we focus first on more traditional advertising, obviously things like registration cards, phone surveys, and more recently, the ability to actually have trackable phone numbers. So some of the telecommunication providers, telephone providers, from a few dollars a month can sell you basically, or I suppose rent you, a number of phone numbers, and then in that way you can have a specific phone number for a specific channel or partner of advertising. Registration cards, of course, have been around for many years, as have phone surveys. But one suggestion, and in fact Laura Jason's highlighted, is the opportunity to use some free research tools, and we'll talk about those in a moment, and you can actually have that open on your computer and then use that as a simple phone survey, and it does all the analysis for you. If moving online, Google Analytics, incredibly powerful and very user-friendly online analytics solution. It's available free, and but it's surprising, Greg, isn't it, how many operators in the New Zealand market are actually using it and how many are not using Google Analytics.
That's right. We did a quick straw poll of our operators, accommodation operators, and only 50% are using Google Analytics, and yet it is available free and it does provide you with an enormous amount of useful information. So hopefully at the end of this, after this webinar, you'll all have a better idea of how to use Google Analytics. Thanks, Chris.
Yeah, so if we've got time at the end, I'll just show everybody how to have a look at your website if you're in doubt about whether you're running Google Analytics. Some of you, of course, will have logged in and you'll be completely comfortable. Others may suspect, oh, perhaps I've got Google Analytics, but I'm not sure. And you can actually have a quick look at your website to see if you are running Google Analytics. We're also going to talk about campaign tracking codes today, and there's something called a URL builder or a web address builder that you can use for generating campaign tracking codes. Again, completely free, and that works with Google Analytics to allow it to report very fully and completely on the various online ads you're running. For many of you, if you're active on social media platforms at all, or you're using email, then you should look at some additional tools. Again, most of these are free. Facebook, YouTube both come with free and pretty powerful analytics solutions called Insight. Both Facebook Insight and YouTube Insight are available off your accounts. Social media platforms such as Hootsuite and others also have reporting functionality, as do many, essentially all email platforms come with some sort of reporting functionality, particularly for things like opening rates and click-through rates. Then you can look at more advanced tools. We're a big fan of something called Raven. There's a variety of others. These start from a few tens of dollars a month and offer far more sort of sophisticated and complete reporting if you've got to the point where some of the free tools may not meet all your needs. And I mentioned online research tools. Here's a couple of free examples. SurveyMonkey and Google Forms are both available. And as I mentioned, these do all the analysis for you. So whether you're putting a simple little link in an email that you send out to guests asking for their feedback, or you might be asking them questions about a little bit more information about who they are and what other options they're considering, they will click through, complete a simple little survey that you can set up at no cost, and these tools, certainly SurveyMonkey does all the analysis for you. There's also a variety of low-paid options that give you some more complete solutions in terms of reporting and setting up multiple surveys and customizing them and so on. Then I wanted to emphasize, Greg, the importance of having an advertising and marketing plan. So a lot of problems in this whole area of measuring the effectiveness of advertising start off from not having a clear plan. So obviously without a clear plan, you don't know where you're going, and therefore you don't know what represents success or failure. So basically this sort of four-step approach is usually smart. So develop a plan, and within that plan you need to have specific measurable objectives. Those objectives should be related to basically how you're going to measure them and the specific measurements that are important for your business, and we'll provide some examples shortly. So for every advertising investment, make sure you've got some specific and measurable ways in which you're going to judge success or failure. Then you obviously need to measure and report against that, and most importantly, as we've said, refine and improve your advertising. So obviously, the next time the sales rep pops in the door, you've got a clear sense of whether that ad was working for you or not working for you. And perhaps even more importantly, during the year, if you've spent some money with Jason's or somebody else, if it's suddenly online, you're looking at what's working, what isn't working, and you're on the phone with them or talking to your rep about what needs to change if perhaps you're not seeing the success that you think you want to have from that advertising investment. So here's a pretty complete marketing and advertising plan, but even if it's on the back of an envelope, you just need to obviously focus on the key things, most importantly identifying your campaign target market, so there's audience, what are your specific objectives and how you're going to measure them, how frequently you're going to report, and we've got some suggestions on that at the end, and obviously some budget figures about, you know, what proportion of your advertising budget you're going to be spending. So I think, Greg, we've got our first question related to this.
Yeah. Yes. Could you? We thought it would be good just to do a poll of you who are listening to this to see where you're at with your marketing plan. Could you just tick the box that most applies to you on this question? Do you have marketing and advertising plans? So obviously, if you do, yes, I have a complete and up-to-date plan. That's the first option. Or any one of the others. It would be good if you could just tick the box and then press enter now, so that we can then immediately give you some feedback on where everybody's standing. It would be interesting to know. So I'll give you another couple of seconds to complete that, and then Helen can post the results. Right, I think that's an interesting result. 75%, really more than that, 75 plus 13, 88% don't have a plan but have a general idea of what you want to do. I hope that after today we can help you solidify that plan a bit more so that you can then measure and make sure you get an optimal result from your marketing spend. Over to you, Chris.
Thank you. Yes, that is interesting. Okay, so let's get into the specifics of what to measure. So really there's three types of measurements, and this applies to both offline as well as online advertising. So we have described them as audience, engagement, and signals intent to travel. So obviously audience is the total number of eyeballs, the number of people who are interacting with your ad. So that's the attention part of the sort of 101 of marketing, if we think about attention, interest, desire, and action. Engagement is another term for interest, so that's basically the quality of the interaction, how interested people are in the advert. Are they interacting with it? Have they clicked on the ad and gone to your site? But more importantly, in terms of engagement, have they gone into your site and looked around, spent some time there, gone to multiple pages? And signals of intent to travel. So those are those success events that we were talking about before. So specific actions that indicate interest, planning behavior about a trip. So let's look at some examples here. So audience would be visits to your website, or frankly it could of course include visits through the front door. So people responding to an ad. Certainly of course it's easiest to measure visits to your website through an analytics solution like Google Analytics. It could be phone calls, how many phone calls a particular ad generated, and obviously with trackable phone numbers, that's very easy to measure. And responses is a top-line measure for advertising in terms of online advertising. But where the rubber hits the road is obviously going beyond just those audience numbers, so looking at the quality of that interaction. So bounce rate. A bounce is where someone comes to your website, clicks on an ad online, visits the first page, goes nowhere else, and then leaves or bounces. So obviously, in most cases, you want that bounce rate to be as low as possible, because generally you want them to spend some time on your site, looking around, finding out important information. So understanding for every ad what is the bounce rate of that ad is critically important. And obviously if the bounce rate's very high, generally you want to have a look at the ad, and you may want to have a look at what's called your landing page or entry page. That's the first page on your website that they're interacting with once they click on the ad. Generally it's smart to look at either having a special page on your website that you send traffic to, or actually developing a special landing page where you can have the information.
Sorry, it's Laura. I was wondering, what would a normal bounce rate be for a web page?
Yeah, good question. So generally for a typical tourism operator, something in the order of 20 to 40% is typical. If you're doing better than 20% bounce rate, you're doing exceptionally well. 20 to 30% is generally very good. 30 to 40% is average. More than 40%, or certainly more than 50%, is an area of concern. And it's not unusual, Lara, to see bounce rates for online advertising of 50, 60, 70, 80%. And you can obviously understand if you're, paying money for an ad and people clicking on it, and that then 8 out of 10 of them are leaving straight away before going deeper into your website, you're essentially wasting 4 out of 5 of your visitors and not giving them a chance to interact. So basically 80% of your advertising dollars is going down the tubes. So critical metric to understand, and you may need to update your advert, or perhaps more importantly, you may want to look at that landing page or that entry page to make sure it's closely aligned. And one of the problems often is people are sent straight to the home page, so they click on an ad, say, for a family deal. They go to the home page and there's no information there about the family deal, and people have got a very short attention span. 7 seconds or less is the typical sort of indicator, so they'll very quickly look around. If they can't find exactly what they want, they'll leave, and you've obviously lost that opportunity. A couple of other measures: page views per visit, so that's the number of pages that a person looks at on that particular visit to your website. And another indicator of engagement would be how many people have connected with you on Facebook as a result of that visit. And then we get to the most important metric, signals of intent to travel. So bookings, of course, that's the most powerful signal of intent to travel, but we were talking about other indicators of success. Greg shared some of the examples that Jason's tracks, and certainly for many people it's checking pricing availability, whether or not they go ahead and book. It could be looking at a detailed information on a particular deal, so if you've got a deal page, and it could be looking at, say, your specific location on a map. So that would indicate that someone's pretty far advanced in their planning or trip behavior, and they're looking specifically at, is this the right place in terms of location, for example. And we'll talk about various scoring. So obviously not all of these have the same weight or value. A booking is obviously the most valuable, but these other ones can be scored or weighted appropriately. Okay, so let's talk about the specifics of how to measure print, and then we'll move on to online. So in terms of print, obviously we've challenged in the sense that we don't have quite the same sophistication and ability to measure sort of electronic interactions, but there are some simple, smart and practical things we can do. So including specific directive calls to action in your advertising can be smart. So within the ad copy or the call-outs, you can basically identify specific things for a respondent or a customer to ask about. So you may see down in the bottom left there of the hot deal, it says, please quote Jason's special at time of booking. So obviously not all consumers will remember to do that, but certainly a proportion will. and if you're measuring those, then obviously that's a great way to at least get a sense of response from a particular ad. Registration forms and surveys. So obviously we are asking people to complete a form. The most successful forms and registrations have been proven to be where there's visuals or the covers or pictures of the various print guides are actually shown to people. People may not be able to actually remember the name, but they can remember far more easily what a guide looked like, and obviously collecting that. Now, obviously, surveys, registration forms, you know, everybody's incredibly busy, so typically it's smartest to look at doing a little survey period. So don't try and collect this information year-round, but maybe 4 to 6, perhaps 8 times a year at most. You set aside a week, so you've got a full week, so you remove the problem of different days of the week, and for that week, perhaps 4 times a year or 6 times a year or perhaps slightly more if you feel you can do it, you try and religiously collect that information on arrival, and it will give you a good snapshot of which type of advertising is working most effectively for you. And then finally, we talked about trackable phone numbers being now more readily available and far more cost-effective to have a small choice of phone numbers that you can have available specifically for different types of ads. So let's move on to how to measure online. And this is where, of course, we've got an increasing range of tools. So this visual shows your website, and the different colored arrows are the different ways in which you can drive traffic to your website, both online advertising and marketing and even offline advertising and marketing if you're directing people online as a result of your ads. So obviously for each of these we want to be looking to measure against consistent metrics, consistent audience engagement, signal and intent to travel information, so we can try and get some sense of which advertising is working and which isn't. We also want to coordinate the various types of advertising. So for example, if we've got a deal that's featured in an ad on the Jason site, we want to perhaps include that same deal on our social media site. So if we're active on Facebook, we're posting it there. If we've got an email program, we may want to include that same offer there. And obviously, potentially could even be included in offline advertising depending on the different media. The final part of this is ensuring that we get consistent alignment of every campaign from the creative, from the top of this visual, all the way through to the final sort of call to action. So from the ad, when I click on the ad, I go to the landing page. The landing page features the call to action that I was prompted to click on or respond to. I've got relevant content, so if it's a family deal, perhaps there's information on the services, functionality, features and amenities for my family. So I can look at that information, and then I've got clear calls to action in terms of either pick up the phone, click on a booking link, check pricing availability, checking the location on the map, those specific success events or signals of intent to travel that we know are important. So we're trying to measure all of these things consistently, and then online we're using what's called a campaign tracking code. And there's something called a Google URL builder, so a big mouthful, but basically a very simple little tool that you can use to create a tracking code. So what is a tracking code? So a campaign tracking code sits at the end of the web address and is a unique identifier that Google uses to monitor and report on specifically campaign respondents coming from particular advertising. So if this was your website here, a Google tracking code would sit at the end of it. So this is an example of the unique identifier. So you don't have to worry about how to code this. Google's done all that for you, and in fact we'll show you the little tool that they've built online for you to use. So basically all your online ads and all your activities that promote yourself online where there's a link back to your website should have a campaign tracking code. So all the ads that you've sent out to Jason's or competitors such as the AA should be sent with the tracking code included. You should have different tracking codes for different advertisers. And the benefit of tracking codes is that you can really get full reporting and easy reporting on the effectiveness of every ad, and it's far more valuable. I know one of the questions that's popped up is, why is this any different to, say, just looking at referrals? Well, referrals will look at all of the click-through from behavior from a particular website, such as Jason. So if you've got multiple links on that website, including, for example, in your listing or other places within the copy of the website, it's going to basically combine all of that into one number. It also doesn't give you all the same numbers in terms of advertising effectiveness and those engagement and signals of intent to travel information that using campaign tracking codes do. So it's generally best practice to have separate campaign tracking codes for every ad or area of activity. So here's the URL builder. So how do you find this? You just go online and type in URL builder, or you can go to the My Jason site and there's a link there. So basically type in URL builder, this simple little WYSIWYG will come up, this simple little form. All you have to do is fill in your web address. You can see here, make sure you put in the specific page that you're going to. Put in some simple information about the type of campaign, have some simple little rules about how you describe the campaign, because these are the terms that will pop up in Google. And bingo, you press step 3, and it generates the web address with the tracking code, and you give that to your advertising partner. No setup is required. You don't have to go into Google Analytics and do anything. Google Analytics is smart enough that it sees that unique identifier and starts immediately reporting on it. So all this completely free. So, you know, obviously if you're spending hundreds or even thousands of dollars on advertising, very smart to spend a couple of minutes to create a tracking code so you can get some better information on whether it's working or not. And I think that's the second question, isn't it, Greg, about how many people use tracking codes?
Yes, that's a good lead into the second question. Could you just take a second to respond to this question? Are you using campaign tracking codes? If you are, and using them for all your online advertising, that's the answer to that's obviously the first one. Or whichever of those 4 applies to you, it would be great if you could just tick the box and then press enter, and we can give you the results of that poll in just a second. I'll give you a couple of seconds to fill that in. Thank you. Right, that's an interesting result. Based on what Chris was saying, you can measure the response from all of your specific advertising and get to see which advertising is working for you. So this is obviously a useful thing to know, that you can use campaign tracking codes. Over to you, Chris.
Sure, Greg. And remember, you don't have to just use tracking codes in your ads. You should be using it in your emails. So, you know, sending out an email, put in the link back to your website to include a campaign tracking code. If you're posting on social media sites, you can use what's called a URL shortener. You're probably familiar with that already. If you're active on Twitter, for example, you can take the full web address with the campaign tracking code and just include that in your URL shortener. So very simple, easy, and of course what happens then, you can log into Google Analytics and you're reporting on not just the number of responses. In this example here, you can see 244 people came from this particular campaign, but we've got all this incredibly rich information about what they did, how many of them completed specific signals of intent to travel. And then we're able to look at some critical metrics like average cost per conversion, and our bounce rate, and make sure that hopefully throughout the year things are improving, because that's what we want to see, try and see improve the quality and the return on investment. So let's get to the final part of this session today, and the key concepts around return on investment are understanding your fixed costs. So obviously things such as, for example, if you've got a mortgage on your property, you can have some fixed costs around salaries. You can also have variable costs, for example, cleaning costs, and some variable costs in terms of additional power, for example, electricity costs. From that, you work out a gross profit per booking, so an estimate of the overall gross profit that you get from filling an additional room or campsite or place on an activity. The other concepts that are critical in here is the value of that acquisition and the cost of that acquisition. So obviously the value of that acquisition is driven off your gross profit. The cost of the acquisition, it's also called CPA for short, cost per acquisition, is the cost of actually generating that specific outcome, and then from that we calculate the return on investment. So let's look at a very simple example first, and that's booking. So we might say the booking value for my property, for my motel room, for example, on average is $50 gross profit after I've paid for my fixed costs and the proportion of variable costs that come from filling that additional room. And obviously then if a particular campaign generated 50 bookings, so we've obviously got, for example, both online and offline, so I can measure the online pretty precisely. I might also estimate that offline's added some bookings. This particular example has $2,500 of value created. And if the cost of running that campaign was, say, $1,000, the return on investment in this particular example is 2.5 to 1 or $2.50. Now, as you'll remember, we emphasized, though, the importance of not just measuring bookings. If you're measuring bookings, you're only measuring a small part of the total actions that ultimately are important in terms of filling your rooms or adding business. So another example here would be checking price. So obviously not everybody who's going to check price is going to book. Some of them are going to choose to go off and book somewhere else, but the fact that they're checking pricing and availability is an important signal of intent to travel that we want to measure. So probably a lot more people are going to check price, and so in this case, say 250 people have completed that action, and we're measuring that through Google Analytics. So we know that 250 people have clicked through to our price and availability page. We want to take off the 50 that have actually booked online, and obviously it's nowhere near as valuable as a booking. So we might just say, for argument, that it's 1/5 the value. So 1 in 5 people who check pricing and availability, we estimate, go on to book in some way or another. So they might pick up the phone, they might turn up, they might book on another site. So in this case, it has $10 value. So this example has $2,000, and the $1,000, of course, for the campaign, 2 to 1 or $2. So of course we've got to combine all these things together: the total value of bookings, the total value of checking price, and we might have 1 or 2 other signals of intent to travel: map views and phone clicks. Now they may be even more numerous than checking pricing and availability, but they're going to be less valuable. So for a map view, we might, for example, say that's worth 50 cents or $1. Phone clicks might be a little bit more. So we might say, well, 1 in 20 people who click on that phone, actually pick up the phone and ring, and at some point make a booking. So in that case, if $50 is the booking, and 1 in 20, that would be $2.50 value. So in this case, the number of people who complete those actions and their value or score adds another $2,500. So the total value of bookings and signals of intent to travel might be $7,000 against that total campaign, and in total, of course, it's 7 to 1 or $7. Now, the thing I want to emphasize here, Greg, is it's not really the specific numbers that you should get hung up on. It's the methodology and process which you should apply consistently between different advertising. So if you apply the same value and the same methodology to measure all your different advertising, then you'll be able to make some really smart decisions based on the relative value of the acquisitions and the total value of the bookings and signals of intent to travel generated by each channel. So advertiser A versus B versus C versus your email versus your social media. So that ability to measure and compare is what's most powerful about ROI measurement and reporting. So let's wrap up the session today, and then we can just see if there's any questions. So what do you need to focus on first? Winston Churchill had this sign above his bed. So when he's leapt out of bed every day, he focused on what's the most important thing. So for you, I'd suggest revisit your marketing and advertising plan and make sure you've got a very clear and sensible media plan and you've got specific measurements for each of them. Make sure you've got a measurement toolkit that is going to work both offline and online. Look at implementing Google Analytics if you haven't, and if you have Google Analytics, make sure you've set up a range of goals within Google Analytics so you're measuring not just, for example, signals of intent to travel, but hopefully a range of other success events. Surprising how many people, Greg, who've got Google Analytics don't have any goals or signals of intent to travel set up at all. Use campaign tracking codes rather than just relying on referrals. If you can, get trackable phone numbers. That makes it simple and easy. And then, perhaps most importantly, do something with the information. So I've suggested quarterly. If you can do it more regularly, that's great. Review, measure, and refine your advertising. Obviously, you can do that with online advertising pretty powerfully and easily. So thanks for the opportunity. There's my email address and information about where to download the white papers, and I know your team, Greg and Lara, are available also to be reached out to.
Yeah, that's right, Chris.
Yeah,
sorry, where to go, Lara?
I was going to say, and we're ready to open it up to questions, so if anyone who's attending has a question, just go to your question box and feel free to type one in, and I can refer those out, and Chris can start answering.
Yes, thanks, Lara. Whilst you're typing in your questions, I do have a question. Chris, 50% of our operators don't use Google Analytics, and yet they advertise online. Perhaps if you could just tell us briefly how to set up Google Analytics so that they can use it.
Sure. So Google Analytics is a free analytics tool. Generally, unless you've got some technical or development skills, it's something your web developer needs to do. I know that Jason's, for the websites that you've developed for clients, now has Google Analytics running on there. So if we just pop out of here, Greg, and actually go into Google Analytics, here's an example of a dashboard for one of our US clients, so we're not disclosing any information. So basically, if you go to google.com/analytics, it's got a whole range of information, including beginner information. In essence, what you need to do is to work with your web developer to get a snippet of code. It's a little piece of JavaScript code that's added to your website that then tells Google Analytics that your site needs to be tracked. It starts tracking. During that process, you set up an account with a username and password. So basically you go to Google Analytics, log in, and you'll see this sort of information available. So you can see straight off the bat all the sort of information you've got available in terms of how many people came to your website, your overall bounce rate. You can drill down into your map information. So for example, you can see specifically where they've come from, both within New Zealand and around the world, and then very importantly you can also drill down into your various campaigns. So all of this information completely free. So those are the simple steps in terms of getting Google Analytics up and running, and then I would focus on the dashboard numbers and then go straight to either the map information, which is just taking a little bit of time here to render, or you can go into traffic sources. So there's the information here. Obviously, this is an American client, so most people are coming from the United States. But if we click on traffic sources, and under traffic sources is that information about the various campaigns you're running. So for this particular client, they're running a range of campaigns, so they can actually drill down. If we actually click on this, it gives you that top line information, how many people are coming direct, how many people are coming from search engines, and then within the campaign information it gives you that detailed information about specifically which campaign is generating what sort of result or outcome. So, for example, here, so you can see really powerfully it maps the overall campaign. It gives you visits, page views per visit, average time on site, so you get the audience numbers, you get those engagement numbers, the bounce rate, but most importantly, perhaps you can click on your goal information for those signals of intent to travel and see what proportion of people completed those success events. So I hope that helped, Greg.
That was great. Thanks, Chris. Lara, do we have any questions?
Sure. I've got one from Kathy, and it says, hold on a second. Yep, it says, I'm sorry, how do you know how to set up goals in Google Analytics?
Oh, very good question. So, first of all, go and check if you've got goals actually set up. So let me just click on that here. So if you do not have goals set up, and many people have not done that, when you click on goals, instead of seeing the list that is going to come up here, will just be instructions on how to set up goals. And Google has a pretty simple way of setting up goals. There's a range of very simple educational material on the Google Analytics website, including videos and step-by-step guides on how to set up goals. There's a number of different goals or types of goals. You can track links on your website. You can track everybody who comes to particular pages. You can obviously track how many people come to specific pages that you think are particularly important, those signals intent to travel. And that could be, for example, checking pricing availability or obviously the booking confirmation page. If you're running an external booking engine, then typically you'll have to work with that provider on making sure that Google Analytics is tracking that correctly as part of your goals. So you can see in this particular example they've got a number of goals set up, including ordering guide, how many people looked at a deal, how many people looked at the detail of their property, and then you can also set up very simple goals that are still very useful. How many people stayed on your site longer than a certain amount of time. So a typical tip there is you look at the average time on site, say it's 2 minutes or 3 minutes, so everybody's spending longer than the average. You can set as a goal, and perhaps they visit on average 2 pages or 3 pages. Again, you can set that up as a goal. So everybody who completes more time or goes to more pages will appear as a successful goal. And then obviously if you're doing that, once you go back into your campaigns, everybody who completes that for every advertising you're running will appear as one of those goals.
And Chris, I'm sure you can understand that this can be very overwhelming for a lot of people because it's so new, especially if you're not using Google Analytics yet. But the nice thing is that Google Analytics has a lot of instructional resources on their website, which we'll be linking to from the MyJason site. And also, any website provider that you're working with to supply your website can help you walk through this.
Yeah, exactly. And in fact, anybody who works in the online space feels overwhelmed from time to time. Things are changing all the time, and I know, Lara, you and I have chatted about this before. So, you know, just because it can all seem a little bit overwhelming and unfamiliar, don't be put off. Take advantage, as Lara was identifying, at those tools. And of course, you've got to work out what you're strong at. So if you know, if the whole sort of online space is not your strength and forte, then there might be somebody else in your business that you could turn to work with, or of course working with a vendor who you can trust. And this sort of stuff, A, of course these tools are free, and B, it's not highly time consuming, so it shouldn't be a significant additional cost to get this sort of information.
Okay, it's 12 o'clock. Lara, if there are other questions, are there other questions, Lara?
No, that was the only one.
Okay. Thank you everybody for attending, and thank you especially Chris for putting together an excellent and very informative presentation on measuring your ROI and your marketing dollar. As I said at the beginning, this is the first in a series. The next one in this series will be on user reviews, and we have a couple of very special guests who will be running that. I believe Chris will be running it together with a surprise guest. So I'm looking forward to hosting you on the next one. The next one's planned to be on November the 29th. We need to confirm that date with you. And it's been our pleasure at Jason's to bring you this tool and this resource. Now, as you can see, the white paper is going to be at myjasons.co.nz, as will be a recording of this presentation if you wish to review it. Looking forward to seeing you all on the 29th, and Thank you again, Chris and Lara and Helen, for organising this event. Thank you, everybody. That's it.
Thanks again. Everybody have a great day.
Great, thanks. And we're counting you out of the webinar now. 4, 3, 2, 1. Have a great day.